Hello and welcome to the Natural History Museum of Utah's Fox Squirrel Data Showcase. I'm Ellen Erickson, the museum's manager of citizen science programs, and for the next hour, we'll dive into research on the eastern fox squirrel, its presence here in Utah, and how members of the community, people like you, continue to make an impact on this research. It's really exciting to see your names and locations pop up in the Q&A at the bottom. Keep them coming. Hey, Patty, glad you're here. I'm joining you from Salt Lake City. And before we dive into the presentation, I invite you to reflect on the land that you occupy and to honor the indigenous peoples who have called it home. The Natural History Museum of Utah is part of the University of Utah, who acknowledges that the Salt Lake Valley has always been a gathering place for indigenous people. We acknowledge that this land, which is named for the Ute tribe, is the traditional and ancestral homeland of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes. The University of Utah recognizes and respects the enduring relationship that exists between many indigenous peoples and their traditional homelands. We respect the sovereign relationship between tribes, states, and the federal government, and we affirm the University of Utah's commitment to a partnership with Native nations and urban Indian communities through research, education, and community outreach activities. If you participated in Squirrel Fest this past December 2022, and if you were one of the first 150 people to submit a survey to us, then you received a magnet as a thank you for your participation. The image on the magnet was created in partnership with a local Navajo artist, Michael Haswood, honoring squirrels and their significance to the indigenous ways of knowing. I'd like to take a moment to thank individuals who have made this presentation possible: Dr. Eric Rickert, Katrina Dierig, Dr. Patrice Cornelli, Mark Johnston, and Eliza Peterson, and the hundreds of community members who have submitted squirrel surveys to NHMU over the years. Thank you. The Natural History Museum of Utah is committed to illuminating the natural world and the place of humans within it. And the museum's ongoing fox squirrel research project is harnessing the power of community to learn about the world around us. With thousands of observations submitted over the years, your contributions have led and continue to lead to data collection and insights about squirrels that would not have been possible without you. Today, we're going to dive into findings from the research project, specifically analysis of data from Squirrel Fest, which, as I mentioned, was in December of 2022. To present data, we're joined by the Natural History Museum of Utah's Curator of Vertebrates, Dr. Eric Rickert, and the museum's Vertebrate Collections Manager, Katrina Dierig. After the presentation, we'll dive into questions from you all. So if you want to ask a question and you've got the Q&A up on your Zoom, feel free to type it in there at any time and we'll get to them at the end of the presentation. With that, I'll pass it on to Katrina to get things started.
All right, thanks, Ellen. I'm going to share my screen here. Let's see. How's that look, Ellen? You seeing fox squirrel slide? All right, great. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. I'm excited to share with you some of our preliminary findings using data that you all have collected as part of this project. And this has been a collaborative project with the community and within the museum, across departments and with volunteers. And it's been such a pleasure to work on. And so I'm excited to share this with you guys today. Oh, let's see if I can advance slides. Here we go. So let's start off talking about some of the squirrels that are native to Utah. So not every squirrel that's native to Utah is shown here because there are actually quite a few. But most of the squirrels in Utah are actually ground squirrels. And so they burrow and live mostly in the ground. Chipmunks are ground squirrels, marmots, golden mantle ground squirrels. A lot of these squirrels that you'll see on a hike in the Wasatch. They're pretty common. And then we also have some tree squirrels, this other group of squirrels that mostly live in trees and are kind of your typical squirrel that you think of. So that includes the fox squirrel, the red squirrel. We also have flying squirrels in Utah, believe it or not. They're not true flyers. They don't have powered flight. They're gliders, but we do have flying squirrels here in Utah. But we're going to focus on the squirrels that are more common along the Wasatch Front in urban environments. And so that's the rock squirrel, which is a ground squirrel, likes to burrow underneath big boulders and things like that. And they're not so great at climbing trees. They can climb trees, but it's not really something they commonly do. And then the red squirrel, which is a tree squirrel and occurs in pine forest. They're really tied to pine trees, eat a lot of pine cones. And then our star of the show here, the fox squirrel, which is not native to Utah, actually. And so if you've been following this project, you may already know that, but we're going to talk a little bit about their initial introduction. And so the eastern fox squirrel, which is its full common name, is native to the eastern US, so east of the Rocky Mountains. And they were introduced to California about 100 years ago, intentionally. So squirrels have been introduced in a lot of places in the world. A lot of people introduce them on purpose because they like having them around, or for hunting, food, pelts, things like that. They were introduced to California and then started popping up in other places around the West, particularly in urban environments. And Salt Lake City, which actually is not starred on this map because it's so recent, that's one of the most recent places that fox squirrels have been introduced to. And so this was in 2011 that the first sightings of fox squirrels were recorded near the Jordan River. And it's interesting that they popped up here because their native habitat is the deciduous seasonal forests of the East, which is sort of mimicked here in the urban environment, right? So we have a lot of non-native species, tree species, I should say, in the cities. And but along the Jordan River, which is native trees, they're also deciduous trees. So it probably felt like home to the fox squirrels. And so we don't know how they got here. We don't know if it was intentional, or if a squirrel just hitched a ride on a truck or a train, because they are known to do that. But since then, the population has expanded and just really exploded. I mean, it's hard to go anywhere along the Wasatch Front without seeing fox squirrels, and especially up here, at the university, we see a bunch of them. And so that led to this citizen science project, which you all took part in. So we really appreciate these responses that we've gotten from everyone, because we really couldn't do a project like this without this massive community effort. And so I really like this quote from a paper in 2017, a scientific paper looking at citizen science. This quote says, "Synergies between citizens and professionals are necessary to generate the information needed to develop conservation strategies for the planet's growing biodiversity crisis." And so you all are a part of that. And you're all here today because you're interested in biodiversity, you're interested in wildlife, and you're interested in conservation, presumably. And these data can help us learn more about that. So let's dive into the fox squirrel data here. So as of February 2023, we have a total of 2,053 observations of fox squirrels, or not, if you didn't see fox squirrels. So these are just responses to our fox squirrel survey that's on our website. And if you've taken the survey, you've responded to a variety of questions about the weather and the location, the timing, behavior, diet, and uploaded some cool photos, which is great. So these are all scientific variables. These are all things that we can use to study fox squirrels. And so it resulted in over 57,000 individual data points that have to do with squirrels, their behavior, their ecology, their distribution here in Utah, which is pretty incredible. That's an amazing data set. So 2020 was really when we launched the fox squirrel project, the new sort of form of the fox squirrel survey. So there's always passive observations coming in through iNaturalist, if you're familiar with that app. And so we've used that to track fox squirrels. But this effort from the museum, we really started in 2020, and it has grown. And so last year we had almost 800 observations, and about half of those are from Squirrel Fest in December, which is great. But the survey is live year round, so you can respond to it at any time. And so, so far in 2023, we've already had almost 500 observations, which is incredible. So, I mean, we're on track to have probably 1,000 observations by the end of the year, considering we'll do Squirrel Fest again 2023. And so using the responses to the survey, we've mapped out observations along the Wasatch Front. And so the dots shown in red is where a fox squirrel has been observed, but a blue dot is where a fox squirrel was not observed. And so we're also interested in these null observations, so where people look and don't see a squirrel, because if we're only asking people to make observations when they do see a squirrel, we might be missing out on the areas that they just aren't living. Maybe the habitat's not right. There could be, some specific reason that there aren't squirrels in that area. And so so null data is really important too. But you can see quite a broad distribution across the Wasatch Front, and several points popping up in the mountains. A couple of anomalous records that ended up in the Great Salt Lake. That might just be, some data weirdness, but in general, yeah, tons of great observations spanning all these years. And so, as I had mentioned before, fox squirrels were initially introduced along the Jordan River, so here in this area, but they've also spread pretty far north and pretty far south. We've got some observations all the way down in Provo, which is pretty wild. But it doesn't seem like there's an established population there. I think what's really interesting is all of these null observations in Utah County. I think we spoke to a lot of folks in the community from Utah County and asked people to make observations because we're kind of curious as to why they're not popping up there. I know some of it is that there's a lot of undeveloped area and they seem to really be closely tied to humans. They like to hang out where we are. And it's just difficult to travel that far down there as a little squirrel. So some of these are just kind of one-off observations, may have been roadkill animals, ones that hopped onto a truck or something and made it down there, as opposed to an established population. And, I mentioned our key players here in the urban environment, in addition to the fox squirrel, so the red squirrel and the rock squirrel. And so mapped out here is observations of fox squirrel only, which are red dots, and then red squirrel only, which are the blue dots. And remember I said that's our native squirrel that likes to live in pine trees. So they're not quite as common in the Wasatch Front, or I should say in the urban environment, but there are quite a few mature pine trees that have been planted in town. So there's a pretty substantial population of red squirrels too. And then the rock squirrel in green, not as many. There's a few dots here and there. And then also observations of the fox squirrel with other squirrels, so in really close proximity. And we got quite a few observations of this. And I know myself, I've seen all three species of these squirrels in Liberty Park on the same day within, maybe 100 feet of one another. And so that captures these kinds of observations, which is really interesting that they, seem to be coexisting. But it leads us to some questions about if red squirrels might be getting pushed out by fox squirrels, because red squirrel sightings are less likely in the presence of fox squirrels. So when fox squirrels are present, there's only 12% of these observations have red squirrels also. But when no fox squirrels are present and there's a positive observation of a squirrel, it's mostly red squirrels that folks are seeing, which is pretty interesting. And so we wonder, do fox squirrels actively exclude the red squirrels? Because that's kind of the concern, right, with non-native or invasive species. I usually prefer to say non-native. Invasive can be kind of loaded language, right? Implies that there's something bad happening, but we're not really sure. But this is the concern, is might they be pushing out native species like the red squirrel? So like I'd mentioned before, they're both tree squirrels. They have kind of similar ecology, But again, fox squirrels prefer mixed deciduous habitat, so seasonal forests, things like maple and elm and oak, those kinds of trees. And they eat a lot of hard shell nuts and stone fruit, so things that are really common in their native range. And then red squirrels prefer evergreen habitat, so they like coniferous forests. They're mostly at high elevations, and they eat conifer cone seeds. That's really their preferred food, whereas fox squirrels don't eat that as much. And so the answer is not really in our data yet, because it seems that fox squirrels are much more adapted to the urban environment, or prefer it, I should say. They prefer the urban environment. And red squirrels, even though they are native, they're not really supposed to be in town either, because there didn't used to be big pine trees in town, right? These are plants that people have planted as the urban area has developed. I'm sure if we were to get more observations in the red squirrels' native habitat in coniferous forests, this could shed more light on this issue. And I hypothesize that we probably wouldn't see a big effect of fox squirrels on red squirrels, because it doesn't seem like the fox squirrels are really taking off in the canyons or up at high elevations in pine forests, because again, they like to eat, hard nuts, stone fruits. They're not really that interested in eating pine cones, or they're not really that able to. They can't really figure out how to open them. So it's just not what they do. So there's sort of this urban and forest separation that keeps them separate. There is some overlap between red squirrels and fox squirrels for sure, but we're not sure that it's actually significant and pushing red squirrels out in any meaningful way. And so, I mentioned the kinds of food sources. So here's a summary of your responses on food sources that were available where you saw squirrels. And so mostly a lot of cone seeds and pine nuts, which is interesting because again, the fox squirrels aren't that interested in eating it. Lots of bird feeders. And I'm sure most of you have seen a fox squirrel pillaging a bird feeder. I know I see it in my neighborhood all the time. And it's not really great food for them because it's really soft. So one reason that they like these hard nuts and the pits of stone fruits is because it wears down their teeth. So rodents have ever-growing incisors, so their two front teeth, they grow kind of like your fingernail. And so it needs to be worn down. So they like to chew on really, really hard stuff and wear those teeth down. And so the things that are available in bird feeders are much softer, and they can't really, that's not really great for their teeth. Gardens, a lot of squirrels will sometimes get into your garden. I luckily, I had a squirrel in my garden, but he was just caching peanuts. He left my vegetables alone, so I was really glad about that. And then I know some people mention peanuts, and actually this is the guy who was caching peanuts in my yard. This is the culprit right here. I got a picture of him in the act. So there's a lot of people giving peanuts to squirrels in my neighborhood, but again, they're just really soft, and so it doesn't really help their teeth. What they really want is like hard walnuts or the pits of fruits. And then we get some really great behavioral observations from you all. And so, that's probably one reason that you got involved in this project, right? Is you love watching squirrels. They're fun to watch. They're really acrobatic. So you can see them climbing and running, often, foraging. So they'll have some kind of little snack and be caching it in the ground. They really like to bury them and save it for a rainy day. But also some social behaviors like chasing or fighting one another, maybe even mating. I've never seen that, but I think it'd be kind of interesting. And there have been combinations of these behaviors that a bunch of you guys observed as well, that really kind of lends itself to this idea that squirrels are super social creatures. So a lot of folks saw multiple squirrels together interacting, and so really what this graph just shows you is that they're not usually seen just by themselves. They are, but it's it's very common to see multiple squirrels interacting, so chasing each other. And so these could be siblings that are play fighting or having, you know, small conflicts. It could be two males fighting over territory because there's a female who's ready to mate in the area. Could be fighting over food, so they're fighting over that one bird feeder on your porch, and trying to stake a claim to it. Or maybe some other squirrel discovered one squirrel's cache. And we got some really great comments from you all on this survey. These have just been a pleasure to read, hearing your anecdotes about squirrels. So there's this quote from a participant that said, "A squirrel ran along my wood fence and then climbed a tree in my front yard. The squirrel climbed down and ran towards the street. It buried something in the city strip and then ran across the street to my neighbor's yard. It was foraging when another squirrel came from my neighbor's backyard, and the two chased each other up a maple tree. After a short chase, the first squirrel retreated back to my yard. It jumped back onto the fence, ran along to the backyard. From there, it climbed into a large blue spruce and disappeared from view." This is a great comment. I mean, there's multiple tree species mentioned and squirrel on squirrel action. So one squirrel was trying to cache his food and the other one tried to steal it. And I'm sure it was really comical and fun to watch. But just a really great detailed comment from the community. And then also some really great observations about predation on squirrels. So this was the first observation that we ever got of a hawk trying to hunt for squirrels. So this comment said, "A hawk was hunting the squirrels in a tree. The squirrels were having no difficulty evading the hawk. Their tactic was to hold on vertically on the large trunk of the tree about 20 feet off the ground. When the hawk attempted to jump or swoop from a nearby branch, the squirrels would scurry around the other side of the 18-inch diameter trunk. The hawk couldn't maneuver as quickly, and after about 10 minutes, gave up without a kill." So it's interesting that somebody observed this, especially because most of the hawks that occur here in the area in the Wasatch Front are bird-eating hawks. So they prefer to hunt birds. They'll usually go for like pigeons and doves. But if they're hungry enough, you know, they'll go for whatever little critter they can possibly manage. But I guess the fox squirrel is not a critter that they could manage to catch, which is pretty interesting. And so yeah, we just love having these detailed observations, and they're just fun to read, and seeing your guys' pictures. Man, we get a lot of great pictures from you guys, and just so fun to look through. I mean, who doesn't want to look at squirrel pictures? I know that's why half of you are here, is because you wanted to see a presentation with a lot of cool squirrel pictures. And so I won't yammer on too long. I really want to get into Q&A. I want to hear more from you guys. I want to know what your questions are, what you're curious about. And again, thank you. I mean, this project has been made possible by citizen scientists like you, and we're looking forward to continuing this project and seeing maybe how things change from year to year, and just, you know, putting together a really great data set, long-term data set. So yeah, let's turn it over to Ellen and do some Q&A.
Thanks, Katrina. Happy to monitor the Q&A box here. So if any of you tuning in have questions about what Katrina spoke to or squirrels in general, feel free to put it in, type it into the Q&A, and we'll get to as many as we can before we wrap up the hour here at 1 p.m. A few things came in, Katrina, while you were chatting. The first was a question from Dan, who says that he has both red and fox squirrels in his yard, and they seem to get along okay. The red squirrel sometimes chases the fox squirrel, but not vice versa. Is that typical? And Eric, feel free to chime in too, of course.
That's pretty interesting. I've heard both sides of this. That in some places where fox squirrels and red squirrels occur naturally, the red squirrels seem to be incredibly territorial around their food sources, like the pine or spruce trees, the conifer trees, that they're more specialized on, and they will actively defend those. They'll have big piles, caches of cones that they build up during the warm months that gets them through the winter, because they don't hibernate. They're active year round, like all of the tree squirrels and flying squirrels, and in contrast to the ground squirrels. And they'll chase away conspecifics, that is, members of their own species that are trying to steal from their cones, just like Katrina mentioned for mentioning that observation of 2 squirrels dealing with that. But they'll also defend their caches from other species. So it probably depends on what's at risk, whether they're in their own territory, as to who comes out being sort of the aggressor and who is chased or run out of the territory. I think it can be both. One can be dominant in one case and another in another case.
Thanks, Eric. Let me scroll to find another one here for you. I'm moving top down. So James is asking, are some of the distribution points, Katrina, that were on the map due to mistaken identity?
Yeah, so that definitely could be the case. And so that's why photo vouchers are really helpful. So when people take pictures, it's okay if you don't know what it is, but then that helps us kind of screen through. But there are, a lot of observations that did not have a photo, which is okay. That's still useful information. But a photo helps us to comb through those. And so that's one thing that's nice about the iNaturalist app as well, that a lot of folks use to make observations of squirrels, because it will have like an auto guess feature when you take a picture, and it can help you figure out what it is. But we've got some resources on our website we hope folks will check out for telling the different species apart, because it can be tricky sometimes, especially if the animals are young, or if you're seeing them from really far away, or if you're hearing them calling but you're not sure, because they have different chatter sounds that they'll make that can sometimes sound similar. But yeah, that's definitely that with almost any animal research that ends up being a concern, especially with rodents, is misidentifications. Yeah, absolutely.
And you hit on such a great point. When people are submitting surveys to us, there's an option to add a photo in addition to all of these other great data points you can share with us. And photos, by far and away, are the best thing for us to have, because then it's a confirmation of what you've seen. So if possible, as you're submitting surveys, thanks in advance for adding photos of the individual that you're seeing, or individuals as they're running around your yard. Jordan's wondering, so we're getting questions about food. This is a common question that we get from the public when we're talking about squirrels. Jordan was mentioning that some people use chili oil coated seed mixes to keep squirrels off their bird feeders. Is that a safe way to keep them away from bird food or peanuts and push them to harder foods?
Yeah, I would think so, because that's why chili peppers evolved capsaicin in the first place, is so that mammals wouldn't eat them, but birds would, because birds can't detect spicy. It doesn't affect them. And yeah, so I mean, I think that sounds like a logical way to solve that problem. What do you think, Eric?
I think that's true. They're commercially sold that way, specifically to keep squirrels away from them. And I don't suppose they're 100% effective. I know that there are some rodents that can certainly tolerate it, or will tolerate the chili oil, but I think it's a good thing to do, and it would be good for the fox squirrels as well. If people want to have fox squirrels around their yard, feeding them some things like walnuts that are in the shell would be a really good thing. Maybe there may be other kinds of chewing opportunities that they could have. I've seen them chewing on just dead wood, and I believe trying to wear down their incisors. but perhaps they're also feeding on the layer right underneath the bark, which is nutritious, very thin but nutritious. But I think that there are things we can do to encourage or discourage improper behavior on part of the squirrels. There's some things that we are not going to be able to do very effectively, because they're always going to want to be eating stone fruit and things like that. And that harvesting your fruit early may help avoid some of those things.
Lori later in the chat was asking what's a nice way to persuade her neighbors to not feed fox squirrels. Any insights?
Yes, I've heard this story a lot. Next door neighbors who feel very differently about the fox squirrels. I'm afraid this is going to cause some conflict, neighborhood conflict, unless people are understanding that somebody doesn't want fox squirrels in their yard, or they've spent hundreds of dollars to get them out of their attic or crawl space, or they're disgusted because they don't have any fruit that they can because the squirrels got it all. On the other hand, other people look forward to watching the acrobatics of the squirrels and even enticing them in ways to get them closer so they can be observed. So conversations between neighbors, probably the best thing, and find some middle ground. That's really all I can say.
Well said, Eric. The squirrels, as we know, are just fox squirrels, especially, are part of our lives in the Salt Lake Valley now, and as of course neighbors are as well. And so finding a way to marry those things as best as possible. But it's definitely part of the conversation.
And one
always
thing
try to talk to each other.
One thing that I would like to emphasize, Katrina and I are worried about people who are soft-hearted and kind, and they don't want to kill a squirrel with a trap. So they want to trap it and then move it someplace where it won't bother them anymore. And that's probably how fox squirrels got up Emigration Canyon, because we knew that people were trapping them and moving them up there. They could make it in Emigration Canyon. There are other people who are trapping and moving squirrels out to the West Desert, out towards the airport. And that's just consigning them to a death anyway. They don't call them tree squirrels for nothing. They need trees in order to survive. So unfortunately, I don't believe the city will do anything to remove squirrels. They just don't do that. So unless they're causing specific problems like chewing on electrical wires and causing blackouts, then they have to. But you have to be very careful and think about what you're doing, both to the squirrels and to the broader community. If you're helping to spread them through human activity, that's not a good thing either.
One more question about squirrels. Or about food. Sarah's wondering if dried corn is an okay thing for squirrels to eat.
I know that fox squirrels in the Midwest are particularly common along shelter belts and trees that are around cornfields, and they like to eat corn.
There you go. Oh, sorry. And never mind. Becky Menlove's on the call, and you answered a question while you were speaking earlier. So hi, Becky. James is wondering if squirrels occupy magpie stick houses.
I don't know that I've ever seen that. No. Yeah, they make their own nests. So squirrels will make nests called drays, where they pile a bunch of leaves around. So if you see a big mass of leaves in a tree, and it's really easy to see right now since all the trees are bare, see this big mass of leaves, it's probably a squirrel nest or dray. But they mostly do it again with leaves. They don't really like do big stick nests, and they don't, to my knowledge, use other nests that like birds make. But if you ever see that, we definitely would like to see it on the fox squirrel survey. Send in a submission, because that would be really interesting.
Yes, I agree. That would be very interesting. I've never seen it. You'd think that maybe they would use the stick nest of a magpie as a platform, but of course, most of the magpie nests I've seen are up around the museum, and they're in things like scrub oak, so they're not very high up in trees. And I think the drays, the squirrel drays, are generally way high in the crown of a tree. They're not very. They're really good for summer nests, but they're not very protective in the winter.
Speaking of winter, Geraldine and David were wondering if this winter particularly has been hard on squirrels. They haven't been seeing their local squirrel lately.
Well, I don't think we have any data directly to that, but I would think that the inclement weather and the cold temperatures have taken their toll. They don't like to be out in stormy weather. They don't like to be out in times when it's not sunny. They prefer those areas. Although I have seen them around the museum, I've seen them before dawn when things are beginning to get light. So, but yes, I think that more than winter cold, it might be summer heat, which is causing problems with them, and access to water as well.
I haven't seen the squirrels that live in my yard as frequently as I have in past years, but then there'll be days when they're out, so they might just be hunkering down more. Both Judy and Darlia are wondering about squirrel tails and how they're twitching them and maneuvering them and waving them to, and what that means.
They use them for signaling with other members of this, other species as well. They'll often bark while they're moving their tails, so they're giving both visual and auditory cues. And their tails are great blankets too. They wrap them around them and stuff like that. So
Judy notes that she's observed one on a fence facing north, east, west, and south several different times, and wondering if it's marking its territory by waving its tail on the fence.
well, it's a visual cue. Doing that, I guess other squirrels from all cardinal directions would be able to see the tail wag. So maybe it's a good thing to do.
Jordan is saying she lives in Sugar House near Hidden Hollow and has noticed many squirrels hanging out by restaurants and actively coming up to people to see if they have food. Is it something that's been seen, as in are squirrels becoming less people shy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I find this is especially true at ground zero of the fox squirrel introduction. So along the Jordan River, those squirrels will walk right up to you. Like if you stand still, they will come up to you and stand on your shoe. I've had that happen walking along, the Jordan River Trail, and so, yeah, I think they're getting really used to people. I think another component here could be that the population of fox squirrels is probably really inbred. So that can cause a lot of behavioral changes when you have low genetic diversity, and so things can just go wrong genetically, but it can make animals really docile. And just unafraid. I've also seen squirrels approach dogs fairly unafraid, which is bizarre behavior because in a natural system, that would be a predator-prey situation, right? So yeah, I think that they are definitely just getting more used to people, other animals, the urban landscape, for sure.
Yes, I agree. And I know that I can say that many of or some of the early fox squirrels we got were killed by dogs in people's backyard. So that's, that's really odd behavior. Fox squirrels tend to be where they occur naturally. They tend to be pretty shy of people compared to the other large squirrel of the eastern US, the gray squirrel, which is generally the urban squirrel that occurs naturally in the urban environments and suburban environments east of the Rockies. Fox squirrels do, but less commonly than gray squirrels. So yeah, there are weird things going on, novel behaviors. And some of the fox squirrels are aggressive. Like they come up and you don't feed them, they may attack you. This has happened a few times. So I don't know if it's happened in Salt Lake, but one person is told us that it happened in Missoula, Montana, I think.
Jay is noting that growing up in the Midwest, squirrels were considered dangerous and frequent carriers of rabies. And they're wondering if rabies or other diseases associated are associated with fox squirrel populations locally.
No, the fox squirrels here are not known to carry any diseases. Granted, it hasn't been looked at in the squirrels specifically here in the Salt Lake Valley and along the Wasatch Front. So we do have several specimens here at the museum. So people will bring us, roadkill squirrels and things like that. And so we do have archives of tissues and blood samples that could be used for disease screening. And maybe that's, a next step in this project is looking at if they have, an antibodies response to any kinds of diseases that could be common here, because I think that would be really interesting and important to know, right? Because these are rodents that are around people, and but we don't know of them carrying any diseases. It's not very common for squirrels to carry rabies, to my knowledge. Rodents in general don't typically carry rabies. It's more common of carnivores in my experience. So it's not something that we're actively concerned about, but it's a non-zero chance. It's a possibility.
What about parasites?
So we look for parasites. We have not seen any parasites. So we've gone through the gastrointestinal tract to look for like worms, tapeworms or nematodes. Haven't found that. We haven't found any ectoparasites either. So like fleas or ticks. But I'm curious if that's something that we'll see as the population becomes denser, or just over time that could happen. I wonder if part of it is because a lot of urban animals don't have parasites. So this is true of like rats, that we get when we look for parasites and don't find any. And I think part of it could be that there just aren't a lot of parasites in urban environments. We treat our pets for worms and we treat them for fleas and ticks. And so there just aren't as many opportunities for parasites to really grab hold in the urban environment.
Getting back to squirrel behavior things, Pete was wondering if squirrel behavior around humans is a factor of natural selection, as in friendly squirrels survive and pass down genes, or does each squirrel learn to be friendly on its own?
I think it could be a little bit of both, right? I mean, that's how domestication happens. That's how dogs were domesticated. That's how cats were domesticated, right? Is that they got fed by humans and it worked out for them. It was advantageous to do so. So yeah, I think it definitely could be something that's passed down. If you've got a steady supply of food from a neighborhood, then you're more likely to be successful in passing down your genes, to the next generation. But I also think a tremendous amount of it is learned behavior too, just very simple, classical conditioning that like, oh yes, food, good, okay, I'm gonna keep coming back here.
Right. Yeah, I agree with Katrina. I think that squirrels in general, even though we say, red squirrels are specialists on conifer bearing or conifer trees, seeds and things like that. It's all relative. Squirrels in general, all of the squirrels in general are pretty omnivorous. They'll eat a variety of plants, and they'll eat insects, and they'll eat other things. Fox squirrels, one of the things that we're kind of worried about is the potential impact of fox squirrels as raiders of nests, of bird nests, to eat both eggs and nestlings. They're major predators, can be major predators of songbirds. And songbirds in the urban environment have enough problems as it is, and that would be very unfortunate if it's causing more of a problem that way. So that's one of the things that makes them successful, is that they can eat a wide variety of foods.
You mentioned nests, and you were speaking of bird nests, but there were some questions about what types of nests are fox squirrels and red squirrels using and living in. What are they making for themselves?
Well, I think that they both species prefer cavity nests, and it's sort of dependent upon the time of year, I think, and also what's available. There are only so many tree cavities in a particular area. That may be a limiting factor. But then they can also get into buildings, and they will get into buildings and cause lots of problems in that respect. The drays, as I mentioned before, are likely to be used principally in warmer weather. I think that there are some studies, I've been told that there have been some studies on overwinter survival being much less among squirrels that are forced to use drays because there aren't enough cavities. But I don't know that firsthand. It's very hard to get direct information on mortality from things like that.
Speaking of mortality, someone was mentioning that they saw 2 sick juvenile squirrels this fall that were sort of moving in circles on the ground for a couple of days before they died. They didn't see any parents of the squirrels, and Megan is wondering what could have caused this. Was it poison? Was it disease? Any thoughts?
Yeah, it could have been any of those things. It's hard to know. And yes, in a case like that, I mean, I'm not advocating that people do this, but you would really need to have somebody examine the body of the animal after it died. It's easy to tell whether or not somebody put out rat poison out for them that causes them to hemorrhage inside. And that could be the case in some cases. It could be, well, other things, maybe just the lack of the proper food, dental problems with the teeth that make it difficult or impossible to chew. But yeah, we can't, it's all conjecture. There are lots of things that will kill you if you're a squirrel, that can kill you. But without having a body and somebody who can act as a coroner, we can't say what the actual cause is.
Yeah, interesting observation, though. It sounds like
It's very interesting. Very interesting.
There was a question about, you were just speaking to predation, or things that can be harmful to squirrels. Predation being one of them, of course. What are the main predators in this area of fox squirrels and red squirrels? Katrina mentioned red-tailed hawks in the presentation. Are there others?
Yeah, so there's a lot of coyotes in the area, and we have had a couple observations actually of a coyote. It was in the avenues, right, Eric? Yeah, of a coyote carrying a fox squirrel in its mouth. So we know that coyotes will go after them. I would imagine bobcats too. It hasn't been observed, but that's about the size of prey item that a bobcat would enjoy. Foxes. They're in the area too. Foxes might be a little small bodied to tackle a squirrel. That would be, quite the rodeo to see a, a fox take down a fox squirrel. And surely some birds have been successful. I would imagine there have been hawks that are successful in getting some squirrels. Really seems like the main predator of squirrels is cars. That's definitely the number one killer of squirrels in the valley is roadkill. Yeah.
But I think it would be worthwhile as we go forward with the squirrel project to put in information about, have a place for predators, potential predators. I've seen red-tailed hawks in my backyard, which is a very small yard, sitting on a utility pole, and it was there because there were fox squirrels around. So I'm pretty sure that the red-tailed hawk occurrences and other buteos, the kinds of hawks that eat mammals as opposed to the bird hawks that Katrina was talking about, would definitely love to be able to find a meal in a fox squirrel.
You were talking about squirrels using human structures to live in, Eric, occasionally. Linda, hi Linda, was wondering about squirrels using human materials to maybe build nests in trees. Specifically, she said she noticed some fox squirrels hanging out near a small flag in the garden, and then the flag was gone days later, and she was wondering if the squirrels took advantage.
Well, that sounds more like something a pack rat or a wood rat would do. Would they do that kind of thing all the time? I don't know. I haven't seen it myself. Have you, Katrina? Have you seen anything like that?
No, I haven't. I haven't really seen squirrels, yeah, like carrying man-made objects very often. I don't see them like with trash or anything like that. Yeah, they seem to really prefer to use leaves for making nests.
Yeah, you see them carrying around strange pieces of food. Like my friend Bill says that he's seen him carrying around half a bagel, things like that. But the other things you see female squirrels with their young babies in their mouth, moving them to another site. So I don't know if all of them do that all the time whenever they have a litter, but they will do that. But I haven't seen them, aside from food items. I haven't seen them, and I haven't seen anything like that. That's an interesting observation.
Speaking of moms with babies in their mouths, Eric, there are a couple questions about squirrel reproduction. Could you speak to how frequently squirrels are having litters and how many squirrels are in them?
Yes, I don't have the actual numbers, but there are two potential times of the year, two breeding seasons, and any individual squirrel I've read, a female will breed generally only once in a year, but it could be in either of those times, in having a litter in the spring and having it in the fall, essentially. But seldom does one squirrel have two litters per year. The litter can be, I guess, anywhere from one individual, but that's probably not common, up to 4 or 5, maybe 6. I can't remember. We've gotten reproductive data from squirrels that we've prepared as specimens, road-killed or culled squirrels. And I've seen what are clearly youngsters from one litter. And generally, I think I've never seen more than 4. But that's, that's a pretty high number. And population wise, having 2 reproductive seasons means that they have a very high rate of population growth.
Janet is wondering if drought will impact squirrels.
I think so. I think that I don't know very much about their kidney structure. I mean, we could look at that. We probably should look at that. I think that they're not arid adapted the way some ground squirrels are. So I think that both heat stress and water stress could be important factors in limiting them. I don't know, Ellen, maybe you remember one of the first times we did some summer work, and it was really hot, and we saw that the squirrels were kind of hunkered down at midday, and we're not moving around very much in the warm weather, and you see them often more often in the morning and in the evening rather than midday, whereas the opposite may be the case in cold weather. They would want to be active during the warmest part of the day. So I think that the climate here is suboptimal for fox squirrels, at least in the summer. But clearly they're able to cope with it enough of them so that they've been expanding successfully here.
Yeah. Well, we've got just a couple minutes till we hit the hour. And so I'm going to send one more question to you, Eric, and I'm hoping you can frame it, around the thought that that individuals, people viewing this, and anyone who gets involved in the project, over the course of the next year, the members of the community submitting surveys to us, information about the squirrels they're seeing is invaluable into shedding light or shining light on what squirrels are doing here and how they're interacting with the human, the built, and the natural environment. This question says, when should we be concerned with expansion of non-native squirrels, especially when it comes to agricultural zones like orchards and other places?
Well, when they get there, this is the problem. We have orchards, we have fruit trees. I don't know if we have nut trees in northern Utah anyway, but they can damage things. They have a relatively large economic impact. There's certain kinds of fruits that they don't go after. They don't go after apples and things like that, or at least not often. But stone fruits, as Katrina mentioned, and any seeds, they really love. They're able to find every black walnut in the valley, and there are quite a number of them that have been planted. But that's what they co-evolved with. That's one of their major food sources. So I've already forgotten the question.
That's okay, Eric. We can leave it there. Just wondering about, we get a lot of questions about, concerns over squirrels' presence in Utah. The takeaway is that they're here and they're part of it all with us now.
Yeah, from what we can see, I think that they're going to have a big impact within the urban forest, within the urban environment, but they're not going to be able to survive outside of places where they have ready access to human provided food in the form of non-native plants that are plants that they like, and bird feeders and things of that sort.
That's right. Thank you everyone for tuning in today, and Eric and Katrina for your insights. The Fox Squirrel Research Project is ongoing and our survey is up online. You can find access to the survey at the Natural History Museum of Utah's website, nhmu.utah.edu. Head there, find out more about the project, and see how you can submit a survey right from your own backyard to tell us about squirrels in your own neighborhood. Until we see you next time, happy squirrel viewing, and thanks again for tuning in today. Cheers, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.